Hello, everybody. This is Rob Fredette with the podcast HODGEPOD, and I have a real special guest on my episode today. And I have Professor T Love on, and she is the host of the podcast A Bowl of Soul, a mixed stew of soul music. It is a tremendous podcast, and you can hear it on Apple and probably other platforms, but I'll let her explain that. But first of all, Professor T Love, welcome to my podcast. I cannot wait to talk music with you tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, Rob. It's an extreme pleasure to be on your show.
First of all, I always like to find out, how did you come up with the title of the podcast, and how did you get to the part where you play the songs? And one thing I really like about your podcast is you give some historical perspective or historical insight into the performers, the artists. So how do you go about getting, first of all, your podcast going?
Well, the concept of A Bowl of Soul came up, growing up as a child. I listened to all types of music, and a lot of times you inherit music that your parents listen to. So my parents are both from the doo-wop and jazz era, as well as Motown. So a lot of the records, those 78s, the Cuban Jam session, those type of records were in my house. So I had the pleasure of just going through it myself, playing these records and listening to them. And and also my father, he's a big jazz buff. So a lot of his records were mostly like Miles Davis, John Coltrane. You might have some Dizzy Gillespie as well, or McCoy Tyner. So Walter Wanderley as well. So a lot of those records, Brazilian jazz, I heard those records in my house. And then also my mother, she's from the doo-wop era. So she remembers Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers and all these local groups that used to perform at the Apollo Theater. So we also had those records. So my father was in that era as well. So my thing was, I got curious about this music that they was listening to, and I started playing those same records. And acquiring a taste for different types of music, whether it's, salsa, because, that was also, their era was also the era of the mambo and the cha-cha-cha. So, if you living in the Bronx, we had a lot of dance halls, and a lot of your Cuban or Puerto Rican musicians were performed at these local dance halls. So, we had that mix in the house. And then as well as the Motown, and, my father, he's from the South. He was born in South Carolina. So I also got exposed to Southern soul and blues music as well. So A Bowl of Soul really is a mix of all of those things, because that's the type of music that I heard. I also heard rock in my house because my father had Rolling Stones records.
Yeah, so, Rolling Stones.
Oh, yes. He going way back, he was buying Rolling Stones records. So I got a chance to know about the Rolling Stones as well as the Rascals. So, growing up here in New York City, you had those radio stations really played everything. It was, you heard rock, or especially on the AM stations. And we have to give a big shout out to AM, because it was on AM radio stations. FM didn't come until much later, but it was on those AM stations that broke out these records. And also there were certain DJs that I listened to that were DJs also from the past, like Hal Jackson. Frankie Crocker was a WMCA guy before he became an R&B guy on WWRL and also on WBLS. So a lot of these DJs had an impact. They were generational, because these DJs came from my parents' time, but they also were DJs in my time as well. So with Frankie Crocker, to me, he's like my biggest idol, because of the fact that Frankie Crocker, he played everything. He would play Johnny Hartman and then jump to playing Sugar Hill Gang. So, and also playing Blondie, playing David Bowie, playing Elton John, but then throwing in Stevie Wonder, throwing in Kool and the Gang, and all of that mixed together. So to me, that's where I came up with the idea of A Bowl of Soul, a mixed stew of soul music, because to me, it's a big stew. It's a big stew of music.
I love the podcast. I've learned a lot. I love the way you talk about the historicals, about the song. I also love the way you talk about influences on other performers that we hear today, which I find fascinating in any genre. The influences and also the what I like to call the homage back to the respect and the influence that these bands have today. They give to the groups way back when, and the artists. It's quite fascinating how these different genres can cross over and play a sample of something from way back when. But yeah, I just love the podcast. One episode that really stuck with me since I'm here in Memphis is that you had the Southern Soul one. I felt like I was on Beale Street when I was listening to your podcast.
And I've heard of Beale Street Blues. I've listened to them. Actually, I had wanted to put them on the radio network as well, because I feel like there's still that connection to Memphis blues and Southern soul. So yeah.
When you have your podcast, how long does it take to get to put the production and get it going and get it? It doesn't seem easy, I would think, because I used to work in radio years ago, and it's not easy doing any production. But what's it like getting that episode out, and how much time do you have to put into it?
Well, for me, it's what I'm thinking about, what I think I want to focus on, and sometimes it can come as a whim, actually. Depending on how I'm feeling, what I'm focusing on. Sometimes it might be related to maybe the Grammys coming up, or it might be related to a milestone in terms of a recording history. Like, for instance, I wanted to focus on the Beatles, but what I did was I focused on Stax artists playing Beatles music. So to me, that showed that there was a direct connection and the influence of the Beatles as well on R&B music, because some R&B artists did cover Beatles songs. And I wanted to celebrate, at the time, I think it was the 50th anniversary of the Beatles coming to the United States in 1964. And I wanted to celebrate that, but I wanted to celebrate it in an R&B style. So I played artists that did some of their songs from Memphis. I also played some Motown, artists like Smokey Robinson. He did Yesterday, and he did it off of the Special Occasion album from 1968. So I wanted to merge those things together. So sometimes it can come off of an anniversary of an artist and talk about, okay, how did that artist or how did their music influence R&B? And a lot of times it does take time to kind of put that together, because I'm trying to think about, okay, what artists do I want to cover? Like, I recently did a show on the Isley Brothers, and a lot of people, especially on the R&B side, I don't feel a lot of people know the history of the Isley Brothers, because when they started out, and they started out in the 50s, and they basically their history covers 60 years. So you're going from Shout to In Between the Sheets and Mr. Big with R. Kelly, but really they don't know how the Isley Brothers progressed and how then they became part of Motown for a little bit. And then since the focus, with Motown was not as much as with Diana Ross, with the Supremes and the Four Tops and the Temptations, those were like the staple artists. The Isley Brothers didn't get that attention. So really, I wanted to celebrate, first of all, one of the Isley Brothers passed away. So I thought it would have been ideal to put a show together to understand the history of the Isley Brothers, because they affected not only R&B, but they affected rock. And they also affected folk music, because they did folk music too with an R&B feel on it. And they had an impact as well. They still stayed with their R&B roots, and they had a stellar longevity run in the 70s as a band, and they came out with platinum albums. So sometimes it comes off of that concept. Maybe someone has passed away, or I'm making a connection between TLC and the Supremes and Destiny's Child, because again, and the Chantels, because really that girl group sound still is. You don't see really too many girl groups now, because you don't really see that as much. But I wanted to show the connection and the legacy from the 50s on down to the 90s and the 2000s with that. So sometimes it can come off of the correlation, or it could be someone's death, or it could be that we're celebrating, like, for instance, the 50th anniversary of hip hop. I did a couple of shows on that as well, because hip hop you know, especially coming from where I live in the Bronx, New York. Hip hop was really started here, but it branched out to the whole world. So I wanted to definitely show people how hip hop started up into where it is today. So sometimes it comes off of that.
I listened to that episode about the Isley Brothers, and it was an excellent episode. And the Footsteps in the Dark song that they sang, I said, who sings that? I've heard that before.
Yes.
So I was like, I think I'm well versed in music, not to your extent, but I think I can get certain. I understand it. I know, rock and roll is my thing, and pop, 80s pop. It was a good day by Ice Cube, 1992. And I did some research. I like doing research.
Yes.
That song has been sampled 11 times.
Oh, yes.
Over the course of the time.
That's right.
One was Usher. And I heard the song today by Usher, and it's like that sound, it just sucks you in, that song.
Yes, it does. And what I like about that, and a lot of people have beat up hip hop for the sampling. And I understand about, the licensing, that is important when you are borrowing from somebody's music. But the thing that I can say about hip hop, it makes you want to find that record and research that record and possibly purchase it for yourself. Now, you notice that during the Country Music Awards, they gave Tracy Chapman, finally, they basically honored her for her song Fast Car, right? Now, that song, Fast Car, was used by this group called Nice and Smooth. And this was a rap record in 1994, 95. And it was that sample was in that record. I think Tracy Chapman might have sued them for it. But the point of the matter is, we heard Fast Car in hip hop, right? You hear LL Cool J, right? He did this song called Who Do You Love with Total. But that song is from Bernard Wright. And Bernard Wright, that song was very popular on R&B, on the R&B charts, coming from, I think it was in the 80s, Who Do You Love? So, and he was an accomplished musician. In fact, I think he passed away. I don't know I think he passed away this year, but that song was very influential. Who Do You Love? So there are a lot of songs that use sampling. Like, in fact, Salt and Pepper had this song, and this is going back to the late 80s and 90s, called Tramp. They used the exact Tramp, Otis Redding, Carla Thomas, and they incorporated it in their song. Okay. And to this day, I still love the song, but they rap lyrics pertaining to what a tramp is. You know what I'm saying? So again, it's going along with the genre. Of course, the original song dealt with the same issue. So they did a hip hop rap based on tramp. You know what I'm saying? So there are a lot of songs that have been sampled. In fact, Kanye West got this song called Spaceship. And he sampled Distant Lover from Marvin Gaye. So when you hear it, because one thing about Kanye, he's the king of that. He knows how to take samples and incorporate them in his song, and they sound beautiful. You know what I'm saying? So that's one of the things, and that's what I like about hip hop. Was hip hop like, you know what? I want to find that record, because when I was coming up, here in the Bronx, we used to DJ, and we used to DJ on the streets. And a lot of the history of hip hop started where you have a DJ and he finds break beats, or he finds rhythms in other records and old records. And they could be rock records, they could be jazz records, it could be old soul records, whatever. A lot of times you would be mixing that, So that's where that concept comes from. You mix these records, and then when it's time for the master of ceremonies, the MC comes in, does his toast on top of that. So a lot of times what hip hop did was it did borrow from all these different genres of music. If you listen to Busta Rhymes, he used the song, I think it's his last name is Herman. It's from Alfred Hitchcock. I don't know if it was from Psycho. He used a classical song from, I think, Bernard Herrmann or something like that. And Give Me Some More. And the way he incorporated that violin track is serious. So you were like, where's that from? Because it is mesmerizing. It's like hypnotizing. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So it makes you want to find out where these records come from.
So we talked about sampling. Van Halen's my all-time favorite rock band.
Oh yeah.
I love everything about them. I
Yeah.
don't call them Van Halen or Van Hagar. I call them Van Halen because they have two separate singers. I don't like that analogy, but that's
Yeah.
another day. So they did a cover of Dancing in the Streets by Martha Reeves and the
Oh
Vandellas
yeah.
in
Yeah.
1982. It was their
Uh-huh.
Diver Down album, and they did like 5 covers in that
Uh-huh.
album. And that song from Martha Reeves and the Vandellas was 1964.
That's right.
And that song that they did, Eddie Van Halen with the guitar, just absolutely just brought that
Uh-huh.
song to a new level. But I don't
Yes.
think it disrespected. It paid homage to the group because they had a lot of
Oh
roots
yeah.
with that. But I don't know if you've ever heard that version of it with Eddie Van Halen with the guitar. It's just insane. And then
I like actually I like that song. I like the way they did that. I like the
yeah,
way they did Dance in
I
the
thought they
Street.
were
They
very
put their own
respectful
spin on it.
because their
Uh-huh.
background vocals for Van Halen was incredible. I mean, Michael Anthony,
Uh-huh.
Van Halen, but then also Mick
Yes.
Jagger and David Bowie did another cover in the mid '80s, and then the Mamas and Papas did one too. While doing research, find out something new today. The Mamas and Papas did a cover for that as well, but it
Mm-hmm.
just goes to show you that rock can take from Motown and give it a different twist. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm in agreement with you. One, I like the Mamas and the Papas because I like them and I like the Beach Boys because they had great harmony.
Mm-hmm.
The Mamas and the Papas did a song that was done by the Shirelles. This is dedicated to the one I love. And the way that they sang that was beautiful. They took a pop R&B song and they put their own flavor on it. And then the Tempries, who were on Stax Records, did their own version of This Is Dead. And then they just took it to another stratosphere with the falsetto and the harmonies. So I love, especially with the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones, they had an impact on R&B as well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they did if you listen to Rolling Stones do their version of Marvin Gaye's Hitchhike,
I will
you have
listen.
to listen to it. Yes, you got to check that out. That's one of in fact, that's on my little music, my music phone. I turned a smartphone into a music device. And if you listen to them, and also they did a song by Don Covey, That's How Strong My Love Is, which is already a known R&B song. And the way Mick Jagger he sang his heart out on that, so I got love for Mick Jagger because Mick Jagger, they have no doubt about saying that they were influenced by blues. They've always said that, and I believe they got the name of the group from, I think, one of Muddy Waters' songs, and call themselves the Rolling Stones. You understand? So, I got love for the Rolling Stones, because I think they're really a gritty. If they weren't a gritty rock group, they'd be a gritty blues and R&B band.
Yeah,
but I think they're all of that.
Yeah, I agree. And when you hear the Stones, like in the '60s and '70s, you definitely hear some songs
Yeah.
that are definitely have a blues. The guitar sounds different. The guitar for me. I heard one today off of Sticky Fingers. Can you hear me knocking? There you go. That was the one guitar that had a nice grainy guitar.
Yes.
But yeah, that was incredible. But yeah, I think that they take from different genres. I think when they sample, I think it's pretty neat. And what's good now today, we can just pull up our phone. You mentioned your phone. My phone is all of music. You can pull up. I don't really text or talk on it's music and podcasts.
Yeah, that's what I have. It just has nothing but podcasts. And if I hear a song, there's this station called Whiskey Soul on Live 365, and they play 45s that I have never heard of, or flip side, B-sides. I'm like, okay, I got to find these records, and that just tells you the amount of music that's out there that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Spoke of the Beatles earlier. The first song I remember when I was like 3 years old was Yellow Submarine. That's the earliest song I remember because I remember the cartoon on TV, the Yellow Submarine, or the movie, whatever. I remember that, but I mean the Beatles had a lot of influence as well with.
Yeah, they and also the Beatles were big Motown fans. And in fact, when Motown, which they say was a failed tour. They said it was a fail, but I think they came out there when Dusty Springfield, who was also big on Motown, and had introduced them on Steady Ready Go,
Mhm.
their show out there. And that was to give Motown some publicity. But the Beatles were big on Motown. In fact, when they did their little version of Money, That's What I Want. And
Mhm.
then also they did Twist and Shout. They did the Isley
Yes.
Brothers. They did their version. And I saw a documentary about Little Richard, and Little Richard met them, and this was before they became very popular, because Little Richard was touring over there in England in the 60s or early 60s. And he didn't think nothing of them, in a sense, he said, but a lot of, when you hear them doing the woos, when you hear them do the woos, I said, okay, that's Little Richard, So they were, when you had woo, I said, okay, now I know the connection now, But they were big on Motown, and I know when they did their first concert here in New York in Shea Stadium, they had Brenda Holloway, who was a Motown artist, opening for them. So they were very big on Motown. And when Motown came to England, that was like a big deal. And I think that's what also helped Motown to have worldwide appeal when they went to England.
Fascinating. It's amazing how all these genres all cross paths or build off of each other, and they just pretty much get popular. Like the Beatles, when they came over here, that you mentioned Chase Stadium, you can't even hear the music. I mean, you just hear people screaming, and
that's
the
right.
Officers didn't look.
They just went bananas
on the field.
Yeah, because once they were on Ed Sullivan, that was it. And then after Ed Sullivan, then they did Shea Stadium, and then it just went bananas. You understand what I'm saying? So it took that introduction on Ed Sullivan to propel them, because one thing that's fascinating, and I want you to, if you get a chance, I want you to check out the story of VJ Records, because the Capitol Records initially passed on the Beatles.
Wow.
They didn't think nothing of them yet. But when VJ Records, which was based in Chicago and was owned by, her name is Vivian Carter, I believe it's Vivian Carter. Vivian was a Black-owned label, and they were the first to sign the Beatles to their label. But the problem with that, and this is when they were starting to become defunct, and towards the mid 60s, when the Beatles caught on, Capitol started raising their ears again. But the problem with VJ is that they weren't able to handle the distribution of those records. Once the Beatles caught on, they couldn't handle it. And in those days, if you didn't have good distribution, you were sunk. Okay. And basically you had to have a distribution arm that could put out these records as quick as these people catch on. You had to put those records out, and they really couldn't handle that. And really, they lost the Beatles that way.
Wow.
They did. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. And then also they also had the Four Seasons on VJ. They were on VJ Records as well. But I want you to check out the story of VJ Records, because VJ Records was the first Black independent record label before Motown.
Wow. Well, there's so much to discuss. You mentioned Dusty Springfield.
Yes.
Dusty Springfield, she was, she had been out of music for a while. And then in the mid 80s, the Pet Shop Boys begged her to come on to their album, What Have I Done to Deserve This? And she was reluctant to do it. And she came out and did it. And it was a smash hit in 1986 and 87. And she is so, when you look back, she was so glad she did it, because they were so excited when she jumped on. Pet Shop Boys literally begged her to come on to that song.
Yeah, and one thing you have to check out about, I have a lot of respect for Dusty Springfield, because not only was she an avid fan of R&B, she embraced R&B, especially in English. She embraced it wholeheartedly, but she also did some muscle shows. When she did Son of a Preacher Man, I believe that was done in Muscle Shoals Studio in Alabama. But she also did some R&B sides with Gamble and Huff. And those sides, Brand New Me, that was a Jerry Butler song. she did some really classic soul R&B with Gamble and Huff, who later became the owners of Philadelphia International Records. So she also helped to usher in the Philly soul sound as well.
So you mentioned Philly soul. There's a lot of soul. Is there different parts of the country where soul sounds different? I know we went off on a tangent here, but what about the soul? Is it different like here in the South and say like up north or in the Midwest?
It most definitely is. If you've noticed, and when listening to music in the 50s and 60s, you were able to distinguish where music came from. Now, Detroit had their own sound. They really did. And not only just Motown, but Detroit had their own sound. There were other labels other than Motown, like Rick Tick, Golden World, those type of labels. They had their own sound, and you could tell that was a Detroit soul sound. Now, in the North, we had our own sound. We were very string arrangement, production heavy. But if you listen to songs that came out of Scepter Records with Florence Greenberg, which was the label that Dionne Warwick was on, and other records that came out of New York City, especially like Tommy James and the Shondells, they came off of Roulette Records, which was based right here in New York City. And if you listen to some of the doo-wop records that came out of New York City, they had that New York City sound. And when I say New York City sound, a lot of the songwriters came out of the Brill Building, which is in downtown Manhattan on 50th Street, where you had Ellie Greenwich, even Phil Spector, just a John Barry, Cynthia Barry. You had a lot of them that were producing records, even Lieber and Stoller, who were on Atlantic Records, were producing records for the Drifters and the Coasters and stuff like that. So New York had their own type of sound, whereas Florida had, especially with soul, Florida had their own sound. If you check out a documentary about, it's called Deep Soul Records, about the Miami sound, the Black Miami sound, and a lot of the artists that came out of there, like Betty Wright. You can check out that documentary as well, to see like they had their own Southern soul sound, which was mixed with Bahamian music. It had, because Miami is a cross culture of Cuban, Bahamian, other cultures mixed together, and then you can hear the sound, the big marching band sound too, and also of course Memphis also had their own sound. Memphis is known for a lot of the rhythm section, especially horns.
Yeah, the Memphis horns as its own sound.
That's right. You better believe it. And some of those horn players came from schools where they learned that instrumentation of horns. There's a book called The Chitlin Circuit. Yes, they talk about that. And also when you listen to Al Green and Ann Peebles, coming out of that, Otis Clay, all of these people that came out of that region, you heard they had a different sound. They had like a cooker, like a simmer cooker type sound, where they use a lot of organs, the horns, know what I'm saying? So Memphis had their own sound as well. And when you listen to California, the record labels, Aladdin Records, all those record labels, San Francisco on down, and there's a lost history about Black soul music in San Francisco, but it existed. They had record labels out there. So there you could tell what was a West Coast sound, what was Midwestern, right? The Midwestern, including Michigan, right? And then you knew what a Southern soul sound was, and you knew what a Northern sound was.
Interesting. Yeah, the Memphis horns, that Memphis sound, when you hear it, it's so distinct. And while we're on Memphis also is known for the Stax record label.
Oh yeah,
back in the day, and quite a few artists came out of there as well, like Isaac Hayes, and
you got Isaac Hayes,
Rufus Thomas,
Carla Thomas, right? And Rufus Thomas, right? You had the Temprees, right? The Mad Lads, right? You also had the Barkays, right? Otis Redding is part of that. Even though he was on Atlantic Records, his music was produced in Memphis, okay? And he used the Barkays as his backing band. And as you know, some of the members of the Bar-Kays were killed with him in that plane crash. So, you know, Isaac Hayes, right? There's numerous artists that was on the gentleman, he died. He was a gospel singer as well. That was on there as well. So, you know, the Stax sound to me was, I don't know if it was an accident, because from what I understand from the history of Stax, it really was trying to be a country and western label. That was the goal, but it didn't happen that way, right? Nope. But that's all right. Accidents happen, you know, good accidents happen. And the fact that Mr. Stewart, you know, the fact that he, you know, he had this label where he brought people of color together to play with Booker T and the MGs, everybody together, making some great music coming out of that part of the country. And you know, it was a different sound. Johnny Taylor, you know what I'm saying? I grew up listening to Johnny Taylor, you know, that type of thing. And these are music that's had an impact, still has an impact, even on northern people too. We heard those records as well. And these were records that were played nationwide.
I went to the Stax Museum with my wife last year. It was pretty neat. Just the history and the records and just the chronological history of it was fascinating. And it shows like what Memphis, here in Memphis, you had the Stax Museum, and then we also have Sun Records, another vibe back in the day. Obviously, Sun Records was huge as well.
That's right. So I think that's where B.B. King, he was on Sun Records.
B.B. King, and I have something on B.B. King. You know, back in the late '80s, he did a song with U2, which U2 at the time was the hottest rock group in the world.
Yes.
And When Love Comes to Town.
Yes, I played that.
I watched that video today. I hadn't seen it in a while, but I watched it 2 or 3 times getting ready for today. And B.B. King, I'll tell you what, those guys were just like in awe of B.B. King when they were in Sun Studios recording, because they actually recorded the song in Sun Studios.
And, nice.
What was really cool about it was the homage that they paid to B.B. King, but yet when they did the video inside, you could see like in the little corners there, Elvis Presley and the $1 Million Quartet. I thought it was really done well. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's because I remember I was in a rock band for about 8 years, and we played When Love Comes to Town, and it's a great song to play. You know what I'm saying? And the wailing and stuff like that. I liked it. I liked it very much. I don't know. It was a different song for us to play, but it was a good song to play.
Oh yeah, and you know, B.B. King, he was. I mean, just the fact that he went on with U2, just that U2 would, you know, they really wanted him for that song.
Yes.
And I thought that was pretty.
I think that's
really
awesome.
Enjoyed that. If you haven't seen the video, you need to see it because they have shot in Memphis.
Yes,
it's pretty cool. So
all right, yes, I like that. You know, I like when they have these collaboration. But what I find is that a lot of the rock artists, they will pay homage to the folks that influenced them and have them. You know, even when the Rolling Stones had Peter Tosh, when Mick Jagger was singing with Peter Tosh. On one of their records from back in the day, I like that because they really do acknowledge those artists that helped them propel them too.
Yeah, and you know, also I knew that Aretha Franklin lived in Memphis. Here in Memphis, she lived at 406 Lucy Avenue, I believe.
Wow.
And then Tina Turner was born in Brownsville, Tennessee, just east of here. And then Isaac Hayes was from Covington, Tennessee. And
that's right.
You hear all these names, it's like, whoa, because I heard a podcast of yours where you played a really old song of Aretha Franklin playing the piano.
Yes.
It was like, wow. I mean, she put her heart and soul into that song.
Well, you know, I believe she was born in Memphis. From what I understand. And, you know, I think that's where her mother and father, you know, they lived initially. They had moved there or whatever. But, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that Aretha has Southern roots, you know, and you heard that in her music. You know, even though she moved to Detroit, you understand, but a lot of Detroiters are from the South. So a lot of them are from the South anyway. You know what I'm saying? Now, even some of my relatives have moved to Detroit to work at the car plants and stuff. But you hear her roots. Isaac Hayes. I get astonished with Isaac Hayes because Isaac Hayes, he could play a mean saxophone. I saw a video. It was a documentary where they filmed them at Stax Studios. And I think it was like 68, 69. They were working on one of the Emotions record, Because I Love You or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was teaching the horn section how to play on that song. And he was playing a big old baritone saxophone. Okay. So from what I understand, and he was self-taught because he could play piano and he could play horns, but Isaac Hayes, he always amazes me because when he, the depth of some of his records and we, I've had all his Black Moses, the song Hyperbolic Sesquicatalistic, when he was doing his little, thing with Psychedelic Soul, and Shaft, and how he's a great arranger. A lot of people don't give Isaac Hayes credit for arrangements. He's a good arranger, excellent arranger. He knows, it's like his ears know what should be there, what should be over here. And they don't give him credit for that. I mean, he's a songwriter, but he was an excellent arranger. Very excellent
Shaft
arranger.
was awesome. Shaft,
yes. That album was killer. The whole album was killer.
And he won an Academy Award, if I'm not mistaken, for that.
Yes, he did.
That is incredible. That was 1971.
That's right. And I'm gonna tell you, that was when he came out with Shaft. That was it. We were done. You know what I'm saying? And then more albums after that he did. That Black Moses thing was the persona itself was overpowering. But then it came with the talent, with the music, the backup singers. To me, he really took Stax to another level. And because I know after Otis Redding, there was a lull. They said there was a lull because Otis was their biggest artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? But after he died, Stax had a lull there because of the loss. But then they came right back. And then, it was, Isaac Hayes taking them into the stratosphere.
Yeah. And, Isaac Hayes, he used to go to Grizzlies when the Memphis Grizzlies moved here from Vancouver. He was known to go to Grizzlies games. He had season tickets.
Yes.
And then, I believe he also did like a radio show here at 103.5, I believe. He used to do a radio show, I guess maybe once a week or something like that.
Uh-huh.
I thought
he
that
was popular in New York. He did a radio show. He was on 98.7 KISS. They hired him to work up here, and he would do the morning shows, and it was fabulous. It was fabulous having Ike, do radio here.
And you know what? Remember him in South Park?
Yes, Chef. Yes, you know what I'm saying. But his son is doing some tremendous things with fan base, and making that a new social media platform. So his son is doing some really fabulous stuff, with social media and taking it to another level, But Isaac, definitely his music is iconic, and his music has been sampled. A lot of groups have sampled, hip hop groups have sampled Isaac Hayes. So, because of that funk, that groove, that, it's just still killer to this day.
Yeah, what's great about music too is like when the artists or groups are long gone, you can still listen to it like if it was yesterday. That's what I really liked about, like you mentioned the Rolling Stones. They've been together 60 years?
Yes.
And Mick Jagger sounds like he did when he was like 27.
Yeah, pretty much.
He's 80 years old. I don't know how he does it. It's incredible. I mean, they're still going. And
he's incredible.
I just love the him as a frontman and just their overall persona. Just real quick though, I listened to one of your podcasts, and you mentioned Little Milton, Eddie Boyd.
Eddie Boyd, yeah.
Eddie Boyd.
And
they did some recordings at Sun Records. So, here's some of the folks who obviously recorded at Sun Records: Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, Ike Turner, Ruth. That's it. Unbelievable.
Wow.
So they just had. It's amazing how all the different, rock, country, all
That's right.
got to be at Sun Records. It's quite
Yes.
extraordinary. And
Yes.
it's quite a place to check out too if you're ever in Memphis.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he told me that he went to visit Sun Records. He loved that was his highlight. He loved it to death. So
It's
you know what I'm
unbelievable.
saying? Yeah, he said it is unbelievable.
You say you're standing where Elvis stood or Johnny Cash.
That's right.
It's incredible when you go down there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like when people go to the Motown the museum, and they're standing in the studio where all those groups recorded.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's one of my trips I want to make. I want to go to the Motown Museum. And you see that they did this out of a house.
It's incredible.
You know, they turned the house into a studio. You know what I'm saying?
Unbelievable.
So
We could go on and on about Motown and things like that. But one other thing,
yes,
another one was Betty Wright. She had you had talked about her in one of your podcasts, and the influences for her were that she had influence on Beyonce, Gloria Estefan, Jennifer Lopez, Florida, Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, and the one and only Shaka Khan.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? She was loved by all of them. In fact, especially with Gloria Estefan, she worked a lot with Gloria Estefan. She helped her with vocals. She even did backup vocals for her. And the thing about Betty Wright, she also had an influence on hip hop artists as well. And especially like Lil Wayne, you know, she had an influence because, you know, Betty Wright started in this industry like when she was like 13, 14 years old, you know, singing and stuff. But her influence is felt. You know, when she worked with Angie Stone, they collaborated together. Betty Wright collaborated with the Roots. You know what I'm saying? And, you know, Betty Wright also produced her own. I think she was one of the first Black women to produce her own record. And I believe she got a Grammy Award for that. You know, so she's always been like an independent artist. She learned the music industry well enough to produce her own music, you know, and on top of that, she has a catalog of work that is something to look at.
I really love about your podcast is you have like the artists like give the name of the podcast. I find that to be pretty cool. I love that. So how did that work out? I like that. I love that.
What you do is, you know, you have to, you know, you ask them for a drop. You know what I'm saying? And they give you a drop, and they'll
awesome.
Put, you know, and you know, they you know, this is about, you know, you'll add either them directly, like Chris Jasper, which I love Chris Jasper because Chris Jasper became a member of the Isley Brothers in the early 70s, and he helped to craft the Isley Brothers sound going into the 70s, into the 80s. You know, so he is much as credited with the Isley Brothers sound as the Isley Brothers. So I had asked him because I played a couple of his records. I always play Chris records, and he gave me a drop. You know,
that's awesome.
So, yeah, you know. So that's awesome. What I do. I reach out to them because, you know, I want to let them know, show them some love, you know, that I'm playing their music and stuff. And, you know, I ask for a drop. So
that's cool. So talk about your podcast again. How often do you drop an episode, and where can you find your podcast and all that good stuff?
Well, you can find my podcast at abowlofsoul.com. I usually drop a podcast every Friday. Either Friday or Saturday. Usually you'll see it uploaded. You can get alerts to get the podcast. It is on, like you said, Apple Podcasts. It's also on Spotify. It's also on iHeartRadio. It's also on Deezer, Deezer.com. But you can go to the website abowlofsoul.com. Also, I have a radio network that's on Live 365. It's called the Bowl of Soul Mixed to a Soul Music Radio Network. And I decided I wanted to go another level and have the radio network as well, where it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I have shows that run from Sunday to Saturday. And I have a blues music. You can hear blues on Saturday at 12 with Jay Boogie, who is from Mississippi. And he plays like the latest hot new Southern soul. Which I'm glad that is catching on again, like the old days is catching on again. And I also have smooth jazz because I'm a big smooth jazz buff too. on Sundays at 6 p.m. And I also have another R&B show, which is like he plays new R&B, plus he's an R&B artist. Ashley Scotty has a show on there. And also have slow jams, Heavy Storm, Quiet Storm with Melvin Jordan. That comes on Wednesdays at 7. And Al Seaforth, he does jazz and soul on Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. So, and then also I put my show on Sundays and Friday at 5. And then on Sunday, I'll put something on at 4:30 as well. And I play gospel as well. So, I'm doing, which I love, because people are, listening. They're tuning in, which I love, in regards to that. And, I think it's a great thing. I'm getting ready to put another gentleman on my show where he does comedy and talk and music, like a morning type thing, for Monday, Wednesdays, and Friday. BJ Murphy, he has a show. So that's what I'm doing. And in the meantime, also, you can follow me on Twitter at a bowl of soul. They call it X now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You can follow me on Instagram, PROF at PROFT Love. I also have a Facebook page called A Bowl of Soul, a mixed stew of soul music.
Yeah.
So that's what I do there.
One thing I really love about the podcast is you play the music and you give some historical perspective. You give some, information that you can learn something new about an artist or a group. And that's what I really like. I'm all about nostalgia and learning new things about different people and different groups and things like that. And, you're always going to learn something new on your podcast. So the podcast is A Bowl of Soul, a mixed stew of soul music. Professor T. Love has joined me. And Professor, I hope you would come on again to talk more music, because we could probably talk another 6 hours.
Well, you got that right, man, because there's so much music out here that it's unbelievable. They got this new thing for R&B, alternative R&B, which I am exploring that too. That's something new.
Well, you mentioned like the back in the 80s, it was just like pop, rock, heavy metal, rap, the adult contemporary. And now, like, if I go to my Apple phone, there's like 50 genres, 50 different characteristics of music. So it's really grown. And I think, with music these days, again, we can put it on our phone, we can listen to it, and we can program our own radio station if we want. And that's what makes the beauty of it. So, but
that's right.
Professor T. Love, I really appreciate your time tonight joining me. I really enjoyed it.
Listen, I had a great time talking with you. I'm glad I'm talking to a fellow Memphis, Tennessee resident, you know what I'm saying? And got some places I need to see down in Memphis.
Yes.
And check out. Looking forward to that.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, thank you very